Well, when we made Maurice, it was bang in the middle of our interest in Ian Forster. We had just made A Room with a View, and I decided to reread Maurice because I had read it when it was published right after Forster had died in 1970 or so. I'd read it then, but I didn't remember anything about it, and so I decided to reread it. And it just appealed to me at once. I thought it would make a very good film. Of course, that novel was very close to Forster. It wasn't something that he felt he could bring out during his life. It was about homosexuality, and that was an absolutely forbidden subject. And the story of Maurice is about a young man who has these feelings which he doesn't know what they mean, and they seem to mean something horrible and criminal. Then he falls in love with Clive, his friend. The friend Clive, from the beginning, said no sex. I mean, he was very much a Cambridge intellectual, and he had a million reasons why you ought not to have sexual relations with someone of the same sex, and so he brought these out. And Maurice went along with that, being the sort of weaker person intellectually. He went along with that, but still he was hopelessly in love with his friend Clive. Then Clive decided that actually this didn't suit him. Perhaps he wanted to get married. Maybe he wanted to go into politics, et cetera, et cetera. And then the sort of whole kind of hypocritical side came out in Clive.
We've got to change, you and I.
Can the leopard change his spots?
The question is how to account for Clive's very dramatic change of feeling towards Maurice. That was always, for readers of the novel, a very unsatisfying part of the novel.
If I were in love with anyone now, then it would be with some nice girl.
That was never ever very well worked out in the book by Forster himself. And I suppose we haven't perhaps worked that out either. If Forster couldn't, probably we haven't made it any better.
Maurice, come. The ladies.
We just accepted Clive's change of heart. I mean, it's not that difficult to imagine or to accept. I mean, this happens all the time, and it doesn't just happen between homosexual people. It happens between, in heterosexual relationships. Suddenly the man changes his mind, or the woman changes her mind, and for all sorts of reasons, and which with sometimes physical consequences and sickness and getting over it and anger and rage, and I think we can accept that.
What an ending!
Maurice?
What's going to happen to me?
And then he meets someone who introduces him to a happier life, let's say, and helps to make a kind of honest person out of Maurice. It all sounds very simple and sort of like a fairy tale and sort of romantic and so forth, and it was. I think that was his appeal, and that was the appeal to Forster. That's why Forster wrote it, I think. He wanted to write about the subject and have a happy ending, which is one of the unusual things about the film. The film has a happy ending for a homosexual story. People are not, they don't die, they don't, or get AIDS, God forbid. They don't they don't end up badly, they end up happily. And that was its appeal, I think, to Forster. Forster wrote a number of short stories on this subject, which always kind of turned the table on. You got an unexpected view of this world and or the life of homosexuals that was not the conventional one, and he could never bring those out either. They were also published after his death. So I think that was its appeal, that it had a happy ending, as does the film.
Now we shall never be parted. It's finished.
And I felt also that with that story, despite all the kinds of liberation and so forth that had happened, I mean, sexual liberation and then, women's movement and so forth, the feminist movement, but still the problems with the characters in that story, in Maurice, hadn't gone away. I mean, homosexual relationships were no longer against the law. They weren't a crime, but there was still the difficulty of what do you do if you find out you're gay, or how are you going to live your life in an honest way? And that's really what that book is about.
And I do beg you to resist the return of this obsession.
I don't need advice. I'm flesh and blood, Clive, if you'll condescend to such low things.
And I felt that that really had not changed that much from 1910, 12, whenever it was, and today. It was still difficult for people to really sometimes face up to their own sexuality and so on. So I felt that it was a pertinent story, and that's why we made it.
The music for Maurice was I was pretty much left to present my own motifs and themes. There's an immense sadness which runs through that story. Like he's part of another world, really, and the world that everyone else seems to be a part of is alien to him. I wanted from the very beginning to create an atmosphere that had been on my mind ever since the first time I read that novel, Maurice. It was very rich in kind of memories always of that sort, sexual, romantic. The memories are so intense that they're quite a lot more powerful than they would be ordinarily. I must say, too, that I was looking for a certain kind of color. We needed a big orchestra. We needed lots of strings. I wanted woodwinds. I wanted certain percussive sounds. I used some synthesized sounds. And I also wanted to use huge cathedral pipe organ. It was the first time that I had an opportunity to do that in a film, to have all of those resources and have an opportunity to really express feeling, strong feeling. Also, I want to credit late Robert Stewart, who was a wonderful orchestrator who helped me on that.
That's because it was jolly, really, is it?
I never thought when I first read Maurice that I someday would be writing the score for the film of that novel. But it just seemed as though it had already been written. I had written it years before.
I've always thought of the three Forster films that we did that with A Room with a View, I felt when we were doing Room with a View that I was something of an outsider. I had never really worked in England before. And with Maurice, I felt that we were more, having done A Room with a View, that we knew more about that world and the Edwardian world that Forster's books show. I felt that we were more within it. I'd say it represents, it was our most intense interest in the English.
And also, of course, the film was set in King's College, where Forster lived, and to have the location made available to us with the King College choir, which was very difficult to shoot because they gave us the permission to do it, and we went there, and then we were chucked out before we finished the shots. Because the guy who was in charge of the choir master, he became mad and incensed because even the trustees of the Forster estate of King's College, the dean, he could not prevail upon him, So here we were all ready and we shot two takes of...
Well, you did your usual clever thing. The choir master of King's College Chapel went crazy because we had told the choir boys to put their little robes on and get ready for the shot. But he thought that he should tell them to put their little robes on, and we had done this, and he went crazy. But then Ismail wisely led him away to have a discussion in another part of the college. And while they were gone, because the man was saying, "You will not shoot here," we then did our shots. rather scrappily, but I mean, they're in the film, and it was okay.
So then we brought him back, he and I walked back, and he said, well, it's just over my dead body, that kind of a thing.
But we'd
his
finished.
body was already
We
dead.
were sort of moving out, so.
His body was dead, and we'd already walked over it, and we'd done our shots. So that was one of the things. And then the other thing we wanted to do was the college next door. Trinity was the one which was, everybody wanted to because there was nobody had been allowed to film there in Trinity College. So when we approached the higher ups in the authority, we were refused. So Ramola Naidu, who's head of the student union, I met her in a pub there. And we talked about it, and I said that we've been refused and we are so sorry that we can't go to Trinity College to shoot this. So she said, never mind, we have a meeting coming up between the students and the faculty. So it was the students' body that we got together, and she went around 2 nights before getting the votes from everybody, and the next confrontation with the faculty and the students, the students won. And then I was called to have a meeting with the bursar, and we sat face to face and we talked about it. He said, well, there are certain conditions which we will allow you to film here. So the conditions were that they were beaten by the students, the students' body, and we were allowed to shoot in Trinity just for a day and a half.
It was, I think, almost the first unapologetic homosexual film. I think you could say that. It wasn't sort of done in a sort of, half apologetic kind of clandestine way. And I think that was its appeal just at that time. It also came out at a time when the whole AIDS crisis was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And it could be that if it had come out, say, 5 years earlier, it would have been attacked. But people didn't, I think, dare to attack it when it came out in 1987. It was, the AIDS thing was too huge a problem for too many people. So the response to it, if people were inclined to attack it, they were more restrained in their attack. If they wanted to attack it, say, on moralistic grounds, they were more restrained and a little more discreet. So it had quite a wide following. It came as a kind of relief, I think, to people somehow as a film.